Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of On the Trail. I'm your host. My name is Vuyo Mvogo. Now here's what we have in store for you this evening. The EFF launches a complaint against the SABC after the public broadcaster refused to air its election advertisement.
To suppress an advert on the basis of disagreeing with it politically, it's wrong.
We think that using the words destroy e-tolls physically in the advert is an indication that they're inciting people to criminal activities.
The ANC, the DA and the EFF intensified their battle for the soul of the country's economic hub, the Gauteng province. And in our interview slot, we speak to Jake Dikobo about how Azapo plans to turn its fortunes around. Now, with only 2 weeks left ahead of the general elections, another party has launched a complaint to ICASA. The economic freedom fighters say the SABC has launched a campaign to keep it out of its viewers. This after its advert was pulled out by the public broadcaster. The SABC, though, says it incites violence.
Contesting in each and every city, the economic freedom fighters are pulling out all the stops. The party accuses the SABC of trying to keep it out of the public's eye. It says the action by the public broadcaster is unfair and unjust.
We are marching to SABC on the 29th because we think that to suppress an advert on the basis of disagreeing with it politically, it's wrong.
The SABC said it refused to air the advert because it incites violence.
We wrote a letter to them to say that we are rejecting it because we think that using the words destroy e-tolls physically in the advert, among other things, is an indication that they're inciting people to criminal activities.
The EFF says it's going to take legal action against the public broadcaster. Nhlanhla Kahlani, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now that was our election story of the day. To our election debate of the day, the electoral battle for the control of the country's economic hub, Gauteng, has become as fierce as the country moves closer to the elections. And the contest between the ANC, the DA, and the EFF is intensifying. In tonight's debate, we invited the three parties' premier candidates to tell us how they intend to change the fortunes of their parties in Gauteng if they were to be elected to lead this province. A very warm welcome to this evening's debate of the day. Tonight we are focusing on Gauteng, the battle for the soul of Gauteng, that is. And on our panel we have the current premier of Gauteng, Menom Mvula-Mokonyane, who's representing the ANC. Welcome, ma'am.
Hi, Vuyo, and good evening to the viewers.
Let me also welcome the two premier hopefuls, Mr. Dalimpofu from the EFF.
Thank you. Hello, Vuyo and the viewers. Good evening.
Let me also welcome Mr. Musi Maimane from the Democratic Alliance.
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to all the listeners at home.
Let me start with you, Premier. 20 years into democracy, the ANC insists it's got a good story to tell.
Yes, for us as the African National Congress in Gauteng, one of the things that we can pride ourselves about is that we were the first to establish an institution that is called government. Unlike in other provinces, we didn't inherit anything. We had to also deal with a cosmopolitan province. We had to establish programs and policies. And as we speak now, we lead in terms of access to basic services. More than 96% of residents of Gauteng have got access to basic services. We are doing good in the quality of education and access to education, including in the rural areas. We have contributed towards the construction of major infrastructure in this country through our Blue IQ in the first 10 years of democracy. And in the last two terms, we've been able also to extend the development of road infrastructure, the use of rail, the linkages between KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, and most importantly also, we have fast-tracked access to land in terms of urban development, acquisition of housing, as well as formalization of informal settlements. We've also been able to manage the resources of Gauteng quite pretty well. As we speak now, our relationships with the private sector and the management and accountability of finances have gone to to a better position.
Thank you very much. Those are opening remarks from the current Premier of Gauteng, who is tonight representing, of course, the governing party in this province, the ANC. Mr. Maimane, the ANC says it has a good story to tell. You are just going to lose.
Well, I think we must reflect on really the true state of the province. I think South Africans will all concede, particularly here in Gauteng, that they don't have a good story to tell. I think the people of Bekkersdal would argue the case that they don't have a good story to tell. I think the people of Sebokeng would argue the case, the people of Winnie Mandela, the people of Mamelodi, the people of Soshanguve, the people of, peripheries of Soweto, Diepsloot. We can go right through the province. As I've traveled, you realize without fail that there's a multiplicity of failures. And let's look at the most critical one, is the fact that it's becoming harder to find work here in Gauteng. That without fail, the levels of unemployment are on the rise. That more critically, that in fact, Gauteng in the AG's report had gone up to about 6 billion rands of wasteful expenditure. You talk about levels of unaccounted for finances. This is money that could have been spent in communities for development. When we talk about the fact that services and basic services, I can take you to communities where people are still using bucket systems. I can take you to communities where, in fact, when you look around, you quickly discover the fact that this is South Africans who have not tasted the full fruit of freedom. And without fail, I think Gauteng, there's no question about the fact that it's a better place today than it was in 1994. The fundamental question we should all ask is, what is the future of this province? And I would suspect that we need to take a different trajectory.
Thank you very much. Advocate Mpofu, from where the EFF sits, does the ANC really have a good story to tell?
No, certainly it doesn't have. Obviously, for the upper classes, there's a good story to tell. But for the people that we represent, who are the most downtrodden, the people that you find in Situetla, whose houses are hanging over the Chaskei River, who don't have toilets when they are living a stone throw from Sandton, for the people of Elias Mutsaledi in Soweto, for the people of Stoffel Park in Mamelodi, for the people of Marikana, squatter camp in Tsakane, and the list goes on. Those are the people who have been marginalized because the policies of this government have deliberately favored the rich and those who had property in 1994 because the status quo was frozen at that stage. What then happens is that inequality. In fact, I describe Gauteng as the bad, the good, and the ugly. The good is the fact that this is a province that shows us that massive industrialization can be done from nothing, which is what happened from the gold mining industry. But it's bad because the inequality is so stuck and it's so, on your face, as it were. And ugly because if there are people who can still, amidst all that, those riches, who can still use the bucket system and are not able to feed their children, as happens. But I think the central problem that this government misses about Gauteng is the fact that it is a place where there's inward migration. And therefore, you cannot look at it in isolation from the rest of the country. If you do not develop the places where those people come from, then you must understand that the government planning becomes an impossibility because you don't know in a given year whether you're going to have 3 million people coming in or 2 million from the rest of the country and the rest of the continent.
Well, Mem Konyane, Advocate Dalimpofu says you are missing the point. Musi Maimane says, how can you say you have a good story to tell when our people in the squatter camps are actually
Musi is from Soweto. Soweto 1994 was not as is today, where he comes from in Dobsonville. If he has the true eyes to see, he can attest that Soweto is now a better place. Our bus rapid transport system does not actually focus only on the white suburbs like what it happens in the Western Cape. Our BRT goes into Soweto, into the former colored communities, into the struggle and heritage routes, the university routes, and so on, precisely because we want to de-racialize access to our services. He's saying Bekkersdal remains the same, but if Musi has been around and knows the story of this province, he will agree with me. There was no Simunye in 1994. There was no extension 7 in Randfontein because with the dolomitic situations in those areas, you had to relocate. People of Elias Motswaledi, precisely because of rapid urbanization, which is a phenomenon that I agree with what Dali is raising. Rapid urbanization is something that not only requires an intervention in Gauteng, but requires a national intervention. Hence, through the National Development Plan, Gauteng is working with national government to deal with rapid urbanization and the development of a national urban development strategy. What we're doing is to formalize informal settlements, is to provide basic services. As we speak here today, yes, there are communities that still have toilets in the province, but it's only under 7%. The lowest in the country, and hence even sitting with the leader of the DA in the meetings with the president, agreement is that priority is the Western Cape, followed by the Northern Cape, and then the Free State. With us, it's those informal settlements that are not on well-located land. But what we do, we provide those interim interventions. What is of importance with a province like ours, again, is to also appreciate that we are a province that has to plan ahead so that then you direct settlements of people. And therefore, the issue of land development, site and service becomes important. But moving forward, one of the things that we can pride ourselves on is that through infrastructure, we want to create inclusive growth. The issue of the good, the bad, and the ugly has to do with the emergence of the black middle class. That has benefited those that used to live in Mapetla, ordinary coming from the working class background, have accumulated opportunities and potential. And we must celebrate that. We can't forever condemn, but what we need to do is to spread the consumption of the cake.
Okay, Mr. Maimane, very briefly, I mean, you're only looking at the 7%, you're completely ignoring the 93%.
Nobody, as I highlighted the fact that Gauteng is a better place. But I think the Honorable Premier refuses to accept the fact that Gauteng is facing 2 service delivery protests a day. Now, if everyone felt that there was a good story, and that story, in fact, was allowed to be perpetuated, we wouldn't be talking about the state of chaos that we're in. We must talk about the safety of the people in Gauteng. The levels of crime are on the rise. There's absolutely no question when we talk about an inclusive growth. The fact that even if you look at the economic outlook of Gauteng and you look at the projects that have been engaged upon, that in fact our economic output isn't quite where it should be as a province. So I think it's critical that we accept, and I want to come back to the situation in Bekkersdal. And I've traveled in Bekkersdal, I've seen the community around. The infrastructure development and the backlog that is there is frightening. In fact, so much so that there's now a new pact between mining communities and Bekkersdal to see what development can take place. And I'm saying to the mining companies, they can't be engaged with that. The government must take a lead in infrastructure rollout in the community.
But
I just want
Premier,
to say,
you are ignoring
I'm just saying that's typical of those who want to protect capital. Mining communities must plow back in this province. The situation of dolomite and sinkholes in the West Rand is because of irresponsible mining business that has happened there. And what we're doing together with them, and as I'm saying, he travels there. I've lived there. I've defended, at least Dali as a person, not the EFF, was with us when we're defending the people of Bekkersdal and the atrocities they've gone through. There was no Simunye, Papa, before. And one of the things that we've also done is to ensure that we bring capital. We must drive capital to come in and contribute towards the transformation of this country. We can't say we're forcing them to do. It's part of their responsibility.
Let me ask you to hold your thoughts right there, Premier. We are going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be back right after this.
That's Sports Live, daily at 8:30 p.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're watching a special debate about the battle for Gauteng. And with us here in studio is me, Nomvula Mokonyane, who is the current premier of the province, and of course the two presidential hopefuls from the biggest opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, as well as the new kids on the block, the EFF. Mr. Mpofu, where is the premier missing the point? Are you agreeing with Mr. Mayamana, for example, that you should be looking no further than the protests, which are a demonstration of the people's unhappiness about the ANC government?
Yes, the protests do indicate the temperature of our people. But once again, I don't think that anybody can say that the government, the ANC government in Gauteng, has not effected development. What we're saying is that for a province that contributes more than 35% to the GDP of this country and 10% to the GDP of the continent, which is the richest by square meterage on the whole continent, you cannot, 20 years after freedom, be having even the 7% that the Premier is talking about. Remember, in the context of Gauteng, you're talking about close to 1 million people. And the rhetorical question that I ask people is, if you knew in 1994 that 20 years after freedom, 1 million people would have no access to toilets, would you have voted for the ANC? And everyone answers no, because they would have expected that by then we should have prioritized the poor, those people who were at the receiving end of apartheid and historically marginalized in this province. This province, you must remember, was created out of our people being taken from wherever they came from to come here as slave wages. So a progressive government should have deliberately, without any excuses, said we're going to favor these people, we're going to make sure that in 5 or 10 years' time there's no packet system, and they failed to do so. And that's what we're told by the communities.
No excuses, Premier, you should have planned and you didn't.
And that's exactly what we're responding to, that remember, in migration continues, we're not only dealing with people who have been in Gauteng from 1994, we also are responding to people who have come to Gauteng a month ago. Because there's that in migration. What you then have, this 7%, are people who are coming from across the country and across the continent who are on informal settlements, including the backlog that dates as far back as 1973 in terms of housing development by the old government. 2, we are also doing different housing developments. We're looking at a different kind of product, affordable rental, the issues of site and service, giveaway, finance linked, precisely because of the mixture of the communities that we have. The protests, our people are correct to be heated because sometimes, whilst you are sitting on the other side and you see somebody across the road, seeing him or her benefiting out of government's programs, you become much more anxious that you must not be forgotten. And hence you will find that the community of Elias Motsoaledi will be worried as to what is happening when there is development in Thembelihle. And hence we have these big projects like Lufereni that takes people from the backyards, from informal settlements, and those that can afford to be subsidized but get financed through the banks to be accommodated. Again, the other thing that I wanted to raise about protests, yes, there are genuine protests that have to do with lack of service delivery, and we have the interventions around that. Hence, we want to move our people closer to areas of economic opportunities. Hence, we have put more money towards the acquisition of land, and thanks, we're doing away with the willing buyer, willing seller, because that has been one of the delays in the acquisition of land in Gauteng, because majority of land in Gauteng is in the hands of the private sector. Lastly, one of the things that we are also doing in dealing with the issues of the grievances that our people have against government is to ensure that we strengthen public participation so that then there's legitimacy in the ward committees, in the community development workers, and there's feedback so that then all of us, including oversight by the legislature, that at least the DA is in it, they must appreciate and get feedback that comes from us.
Can I talk about...
Chip in, sure.
I want to talk about the creation of equity, and we talk about the sense of housing. Now, for example, Gauteng has got 220,000 families still without title deeds. Let's accept the fact that when people enter the economic ladder, at least if they have a title deed, they can create equity out of that. Those backlogs are an indicator as to where the economy of Gauteng is going. So, furthermore, when you look at the very respective developments that the Premier is highlighting, you can go to communities like Cosmos City, you can go to Alexander, you can go to many other places. The quality of the output has been substandard. In fact, when you look at even the new Giza rollout that is in place, the imported Giza, they are not being developed here in Gauteng.
That's not true, Musi.
It is.
No. Wait,
it is there.
let me tell you, here from
there.
the horse's mouth. I'm telling you, we've got industries now in the West Rand. We've got the manufacturing side in Ekurhuleni. When we started, yes, because we had to regulate, those things had to be sorted out. And nobody denies the fact that when we started, there was shoddy workmanship around issues of infrastructure development. But if you go to Lufereni today, if you go to Dube, if you go to Jabulani, if you go to Cosmo City, there's improvement. If you go to parts of Soweto, as we progress, there is improvement. What is of importance here, Vuyo, is that no one denies the fact that things used not to happen in the manner that we want. Hence, we have invested on the capacity of the state, unlike what we have seen in the Western Cape, where they spent 10.3 billion on consultants.
I want to respond to the consultants.
We have built on our own capacity to deal with the ability of providing quality services.
No, you see, the problem here is this ping-pong between the ANC and the DA is not taking us anywhere, because the ANC and the DA operate from the same platform, which is called the National Development Plan. So they are both misconceived as to how to resolve the problems of this country. You see, the Premier, when she was MEC for Housing, I served in one of her institutions called Gauteng Partnership Fund. And she's quite right. We had to grapple with all these issues of inward migration, how do you predict, and so on and so on. So I think when I'm the Premier, I'll return the favor. I'll appoint her on some advisory capacity.
Fair.
But she's quite right. And that is where I take issue with the ANC. Because, you know, I had a debate the other day, Musi was there with the MEC for Economic Planning. And they were saying, no, Gauteng is now to be benchmarked with New York and so on and so on. You can't. Gauteng cannot be isolated, because the so-called inward migration is directly proportional to the outward migration in places like Limpopo, Eastern Cape, and so on and so on. So if you really want to resolve the issues here, you're going to have to return the land. You can't be abolishing the willing buyer, willing seller now, 20 years later. If you fail to do it in 20 years, you must get out. What should have happened is that those people in the places where these people come from should have by now been returned their land, and commercial farming should have started, because the only thing that drives people to come to Gauteng is the prospect, not even the reality, the prospect of economic chances and getting employment, which they don't get even then. Yeah.
Can I speak a little bit about this issue of consultants? The Premier would acknowledge that even here in Gauteng, the vacancy rate is exceptionally high, even including places in hospitals and access to health care.
You don't need consultants.
When you recall that when you hire a nurse, in the AG's report, nurses that you say we want to fill vacancies, those are classed as consultants because they weren't people who are on a permanent basis in that space.
Employ
the
them
Premier
as full-time.
knows that very well.
Musi.
What we should rather be responding to is why the hospital in Jabulani has taken so long to build. Why is there in fact the police station in Diepsloot, where children are being murdered in our province, took years to be completed.
Yes, I want to respond. Musi must not actually be too economic with the truth. The consultants in the Western Cape are your white old guard engineers that have migrated throughout the country and are in a lager in the Western Cape. Those are the consultants. The consultants in the Western Cape are not the nurses at Khayelitsha. That's not a fact.
It's inaccurate.
The consultants they have spent 10.3 billion on them are the consultants that are doing their marketing and communication strategy.
Do you have a different story, Mr.
What
It is a completely different story, because when you add teachers that were not in the system, the AG reports them as consultants coming into the system. The Premier knows that it is completely that way in the schools that are going in communities. Let me also recall the fact that the very schools she's describing, the very hospitals we build in those communities, the very notion shows in fact that we've increased capacity of education. We've taken in key competencies like maths and science and increased those to levels that the Western Cape has got the highest university entrance in the whole of South Africa.
No, I mean,
Very
honestly,
briefly,
look, we can't be sitting here. I'm sure the viewers don't want to be told lies about what is happening in the White Republic
telling the lie?
of the Western Cape. Musi.
He's lying.
Well, he is.
No.
Because the Western Cape, you know, this notion that the Western Cape is a paragon of virtue is absolute nonsense. We know that they regard people, the black people, as refugees, even though they apologized, which we accepted. But the mere, that kind of mindset is what makes the skewed development in the Western Cape to be perpetuated. Right. No. You cannot deny the fact that in the Western Cape, historically, the white communities have been living in all those advantages. Right. So if you're not going to intervene as a government, whatever you do, the people of Khayelitsha and the people of Sea Point are going to be poles apart.
Let me talk about the interventions.
10 seconds, you're saying he's right. What is right about what he said specifically?
It's right. Historically, South Africa as a whole.
Of the poor directly. Yeah.
South Africa as a whole is a place where historically white South Africans enjoyed privilege. Nobody's denying that.
To change
yes, 76% of the budget of the Western Cape is spent in poor communities.
Okay, panel, let me ask you, Premier, to hold your thoughts right there. We're going to take another quick ad break. We'll be back right after this.
When a man's an empty kettle, he should be on his mettle, and yet I'm torn apart. Just because I'm presuming that I could be kinda human if I only had a heart. I'd be friends with the sparrows and the boy who shoots the arrows if I only had a heart.
Welcome back to this special debate on the battle for Gauteng. Mr. Maimane, let me start with you this time around. Now, it's one thing to criticize the ANC for what it hasn't done. Surely you have a plan.
Yes.
I mean, here's the smallest province in our country, which has the biggest number of people you can get in any province. What is your plan as the DA?
I think let's understand that if we view Gauteng's biggest problem as that of job creation, we must then focus not to the exclusion of what government can do on being enabling South Africans to be able to start their small businesses and be able to foster the levels of employment that we require.
So
and key to these issues,
small businesses.
Key to the issue of making small businesses is about making sure that you avail government property for small businesses to run out of. Make it easier. The cost of doing business here in Gauteng, just on compliance alone, is at 80,000 rands. Equally so, address the issues of infrastructure backlog. So key to that in building infrastructure, not to triple tax people. Because the issue of tolling is a triple tax. It's about you pay your tax, you pay your fuel levy, and then furthermore, you have to pay issue of tolling, which renders the province inefficient in terms of being able to make running business easy. Then equally so, you must roll out the issue of title deeds. So make sure you give people equity into that same economy. And then furthermore, create an atmosphere where there can be an apprenticeship for young people to be absorbed so that they can learn the skills that are required so that they can get back into the economic activity of this country.
Advocate Mpofu, what is the EFF's plan?
Yeah, well, the first plan is obvious, is to return the land. I'm glad that the Premier acknowledges that most of the land here is privately owned. What we'll do, different from both the ANC and the DA, is to return the land without either the willing buyer, willing seller, that the ANC proposes, or I'm sure even worse, the DA will want those white owners of that land to be protected to the hilt. What you need to do is to expropriate the land so that it's in the hands of the government. The government then redistributes it equitably among the people, black and white, but it must be equitably redistributed. The problem with these elastoplastic solutions is that they are ahistorical. They don't realize that Gauteng, the very thing called Gauteng, a place of gold, is a place where for 100 years there were historic injustices. So if you do not intervene decisively, but decisively, in favor of the poorest of the poor, you're not going to get it right. So that's our first approach.
Returning the land to people, but also like privatizing. I mean, it's not going to be the cure to all of Gauteng.
No, certainly privatizing is not the cure. I'm advocating the exact opposite of privatizing. Have you been
creative enough, you think? What else are you putting on the table?
No, it's not about creativity. If you do not answer the question of the land, Vuyo, you will never resolve the issues of this country. The white people at least knew that. That's why the first thing they did was to steal our land for 250 years. And that's why our forefathers fought in defense of the land.
But you're
because
also
they
not
understood
saying
what
that
you seem don't understand.
Will deal with all
No, I'm
problems.
saying that's where you start. Do you understand? Yeah. So because if you do not do that, you will the historical inequalities will be with you forever. Whatever you do, you can give a house here, a pair of shoes there, you're wasting your time because the inequalities are entrenched over centuries. The second thing that you do is to make sure that you eradicate the squatter communities and again prioritize the people who do not have even the most basic amenities. It's inexcusable in a province where billions are exchanging hands in the stock exchange on a daily basis that someone should not have their dignity back just for something like toilets. The third thing is the creation of employment. And we say the reason why we advocate for minimum wages is because the only way you're going to create employment, it's not by doing what the DA is telling you. It is to put money in people's pockets so that they are able to consume the goods. Because what are you going to do? Okay, you develop the so-called small businesses, and then let's say I have a small business and I'm selling shoes. Who's going to buy those shoes if people are getting peanuts wages and they have subsistence wages? But it doesn't work like that.
The EFF puts an economic model in place that financially cannot be sustainable. Equally so, the notion even here of Gauteng of saying you want to create equity out of banking isn't going to emerge. And so the increase I agree. People should be paid more. I agree. But what I disagree on is the fact that government should be putting people in money's hands.
No, but I mean, really,
it's not sustainable.
This problem was created by direct government intervention. These things that he's talking about were created by Group Areas Act, the Land Act, and all these things. That was government intervention. To think that the so-called market is going to reign from somewhere and resolve it is really wishful thinking. Yeah.
You know what we should agree on? The issues of jobs and inclusive growth are the key drivers.
Sure.
And government must ensure that it creates an environment where capital must be less protected. It must be mandatory for capital to come to the party, Musi, and it must actually help us to make sure that our people have got means to survive, so that then through that income, they can actually move away from the poverty trap and dependency on grants.
You're
and that's what we're talking about.
You never do things willingly.
No. The second thing, it is my turn.
I agree that we must release capital.
I want to respond directly to that question.
When we talk about the releasing of capital, it's about stimulating the environment so that greater investment can take place. If you put an issue like tolling, it makes it difficult for people to invest in this province. That's a fact.
Vuyo, I just want to say, part of what is a problem in this discussion with Musi is that here you find people that are highly indebted to capital for their own survival, and who then want to appease our people on short-termist and unsustainable interventions. We come a long way with our people, and we know some of the problems, and hence we concede on the issues of the issues of the land policy. We agree on the issues of investment on strategic economic infrastructure. That is the way to go. And most importantly, we also agree on making sure that there is openness, that there's transparency. Those who come in to invest must invest based on our terms and conditions in South Africa, in this particular province. The cost of doing business in this province has actually been eased. We now have a one-stop service center that exists, that does not exist anywhere. But I want to come back to this thing that to keep on happening. Again, which is said about you coming from Dobsonville, that you talk about 200 and something thousand title deeds that are still outstanding. We now have 3.2 million people who now have a place to call a home, just on what we have done between 1994 and to date. And many, out of this 3.2, it's that 220 that has got title deeds outstanding. Some of them have deceased, others have relocated, and you have to follow the due processes. But remember, we also had to deal with the ownership of the old stock that our own people, women in particular, through the laws of your 4 leaders of your party, were made not to be the owners of the property. Lastly, let me just conclude on this, Vio.
Okay.
Let me just conclude on this. I think the solution to our challenges in this province are based on inclusive growth and job creation, rural development, proper management of urban development through proper planning, so that then when people move in, they can be directed. You don't have people locating themselves on the river banks of Chukske when actually government should have site and services available for them. Transport infrastructure is important. Unlike in the Western Cape, the BRT transport in Gauteng, we're expanding Gautrain to go into our own townships. Their BRT is going to the white communities. It does not even move to Khayelitsha, to Guguletu, because those are people that are not seen to be real South Africans.
Okay, I'm going to ask all of you to hold your thoughts right there. We're going to take another quick ad break.
A fast-moving storm triggered multiple tornadoes in the Midwestern states of the U.S. Early reports say that at least 6 people were killed.
Consumers are up in arms over the money they have to spend to stop an influx of spam SMSs. It seems cell phone operators are making a killing from direct marketers.
That money goes to the cell phone companies and not to anyone else.
Special Congress of Kasatu unions may be convened without the Labour Federation's president.
That's Primetime News, daily at 6 p.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back. This is a recorded debate about the battle for the soul of Gauteng, the richest province in our country, smallest in size, but with the biggest number of people in it. Advocate, you wanted to say something before we...
Yes, I think the point that is being missed in this debate is the fact that at the bottom of the problems of this country and this province is the issue of inequality. Now, here, inequality here has been entrenched. So anybody who comes with solutions that want to entrench white privilege, so to speak, like Musi, or people who want to play half-half like the ANC, are not going to resolve the problems of this province. What you need to do, as I say, is to say, for example, that the revenues that are generated in Sandton must definitely be split in such a way that you eradicate Situetla squatter camp, which is a stone throw from that place. That is how you deal, and you can't do that by wishful thinking or the market forces. You do that by deliberate government intervention that says to the people and wins the people of Sandton and make it clear to them that it is in their own interest that the inequality, that the gap is closed. Because if that is not done, they cannot live in gated communities forever. The people of Stratla, they're going to find them in their driveways, and crime gets generated. Inequality causes instability, and that is the biggest problem. And unless you address the problems of the lowest, the underemployed, the unemployable, the wretched of the earth,
young people,
and the unemployed, particularly the youth and women, then you are not going to...
There's no question about the policy of cross-subsidization is something that is already in operation. There's no question about the fact that there's an over-investment in poor communities. That's not the debate. I want to talk about the integration of transport as someone who comes from Dobsonville, as someone who understood that in Dobsonville there were multiple modes of transport. There was Patco bus, there was trains, there were taxis. The question here in Gauteng is that, fine, you can add an additional transport system there by Rea Vaya at the expense of the people of... There is no infrastructure transport that has been rolled out in Alexander. There's no transport in Orange Farm. There's no transport in other communities. So you can add additional transport modes from the Soweto community. Our argument has been integrate the complete issue and make sure that there's transport coming out of places like Orange Farm, etc., etc. where people don't have
There's a
transport.
rail line.
Now, when it comes to the issue of Cape Town,
let me
Western
bring the
Cape,
Premier in.
Please,
Premier,
see,
this issue
you
of
travel
transport.
there, you visit those places. These are our communities. There's a railway station in Orange Farm.
There's no
Listen to me. I'm saying there's an extension of the BRT through Louis Botha towards Alexander. If you visit as a tourist to those areas, you will not know, because ours is not about the 7th of May. Ours is about a long-term development of this province. If you know better that very Orange Farm, Alexander, you will know that previously you did not have that linkage. So phase 2 of the bus rapid transport system in Johannesburg is actually moving there. The Tshwane intervention is exactly doing that, that integration. Ekurhuleni is doing that. And coupled to that, with the transport infrastructure, is the area of manufacturing. That we are now actually manufacturing these buses here in Gauteng, in Ekurhuleni. Where do you get your buses in the Western Cape? And two, show me a lane that goes to Guguletu on your BRT in the Western Cape.
But
the last thing that I also want to raise as part of moving forward is that, yes, strategic economic infrastructure is the way to go. Two, the issues of skills development for those who are unemployable is the way to go. Promotion of entrepreneurship is the best way to go. And good governance, dealing with corruption, maladministration, and most importantly, getting the right people to do their job, like what we have invested with 56 million on creating the capacity of the state to roll out infrastructure, and hence the improvement on the work that government does on the rollout of infrastructure. That's where Gauteng is going.
Good governance, good governance, I think that's a very important thing to be done, because what we are experiencing is that our people are not unrealistic. They know that these services are not going to be rolled out on the same day, on the 8th of May. But what they are saying is that the corruption that is endemic, particularly in the rollout of houses. I was in an Orange Farm the other day, and Mrs. Mukwena said to me that I have put my name in 1996 onto the list, but somebody who came 2 years ago bribed the councillor and got a house. Now, those are the kinds of issues where even the patience of our people that then results in the service level protests, because they're not saying give us, press a button and give us houses, but they're saying there must be fairness. And if I've come first, I must get it first. And the government has allowed this corruption to remain for so many years, so that's what creates
why have you allowed corruption?
That's precisely the reason why we have removed all politicians from all procurement processes. No politician is now involved. On allocation of houses, we have also removed all politicians, so that then no councillor must have an influence on who goes in and who doesn't go in. But there's also a corruptor and the corruptee. We must not sikokele our officials by bribing them. So we need to save our rent and blow the whistle. And where there's wrongdoing, already we have a number from the city of Johannesburg, from the province, in other regions, where we have actually charged people with criminal charges on the work that they
What happens in corruption? For example, MEC Humphrey Momezi is now promoted to the ANC's national list. So clearly, when you deal with corruption, it's about moving people who have been found corrupt and putting them in government posts. And I can say you the interrelation between officials who have been found to be guilty in one city, i.e. in Johannesburg, they get moved to Tshwane and then they get moved to Ekurhuleni. This system of cadre deployment has failed our people at its highest by not hiring the best to be able to do
Okay, we have run out of time. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Maimane. I'm going to ask you to say what should the people of South Africa expect over the next 2 weeks when you're doing your election campaigning, number one. But two, how do you hope to jump from somewhere around 22% to actually taking over Gauteng?
Well, what has become very clear, that's what we talk about Together for Change, is the fact that the people of Gauteng are ready for change. They've realized that their future is not safe in this province, and at least under the ANC government, and they realize that they want change. we argue quite clearly that we must be able to create an enabling environment here in Gauteng for small businesses to thrive, for businesses to grow. We must be able to allow and make it easier by not tolling people, by not inventing such systems, by giving them a transport system that will integrate society, to build an inclusive society, and ultimately, when you grow the economy of Gauteng, you can make sure that opportunities are allocated. There's no question about the fact that you've got to deal with issues of inequality. There's no question about the fact that you must cross-subsidize and deliver for people quality services in their communities. But ultimately, it's about building a state that is in fact able to deliver those ambitions, and that's not dealing with policies of cadre deployment, but it's equally about hiring the best so that the best can deliver quality services to our people. Advocate Mpo, for your closing remarks.
Yes, what we're going to do differently in our campaign is that we have obviously been interacting with the people who form the core of our constituency in the squatter camps and so on, and we are keenly aware of those problems. What we're going to do now is to engage some of the privileged communities, black professionals, the white communities and so on, to say to them, as South Africans, let us hold hands. These people that we have been talking to are desperate. They want to be part of this country. They want to have a stake in the economy, and try to get the buy-in from the privileged communities to see that it is in their long-term interest. The short-termism of capitalism says that you must accumulate profit now and as if there's no tomorrow. But the reality is that if you want your children to grow up in a stable country, you have to make sure that the plight of the underdog, of the poorest of the poor, is addressed as a matter of urgency.
Thank you, Marsh. Your closing remarks.
When we come back after the 7th of May, we would have made sure that with the work that we are continuing to do, we reassure our people that indeed a lot of good has happened. We have acknowledged our mistakes, and of importance, we want to deal with unemployment, we want to deal with inequality, we want to fight poverty, and only through working together we can be in a position to move Gauteng forward, because the growth, the prosperity of Gauteng contributes to the prosperity of South Africa. And lastly, in these remaining 2 weeks, we'll remind our people on how to vote, where to vote. Will all our elections machinery, the ANC is present in every ward in this particular province. And of importance, we know that our people appreciate that we have done, and through our manifesto, they do believe that post the 7th of May, we will take Gauteng to greater heights.
Watch
the space. I might be coming with my best suit back again.
Ma'am Koyana, thank you very much for joining this debate. Advocate Mpofu, thanks very much to you as well. Mr. Maimane, thanks to you as well. Well, now to our interview of the day. Azapo has been promising voters that it will deliver a clean administration which will expose and root out corruption in its campaign trail. The party says nepotism, corruption and unresponsiveness are what currently characterizes governance in this country. I spoke to Azapo President Jake Dikobo about his party's prospects in the upcoming elections. Matawa, thanks very much for talking to us. Maybe I should start by asking you what Azapo got to offer this time around.
Well, in terms of our manifesto, we think there are issues that are uniquely Azapo, that are only said by Azapo. For example, point number 2 on our, on our manifesto that talks about reinventing government. I think we are the only party that is talking about abolishing provinces. We have had muted comments from the ruling party about reducing. We have said that we want to abolish provinces because they don't add any value to the country. In fact, they are just a dam where resources are put instead of going directly to the residents, to the people at local government. They are being dammed there and in some cases being wasted. We talking about the size of government, and we think one way of reducing the size of government is to get rid of the 9 provincial legislatures. And again, we're trying to be very clear to say we're talking about provincial legislatures and not provinces themselves, because you could still have provinces as administrative centers, but with the bureaucrats, they're answering directly to national government.
But I mean, to someone who says, but how is that going to change the material lives of people on the ground? What do you say to that?
It will. We're talking about a two-tier system of government. We're talking about local government. We're talking about national government. We have said, they are just a middleman, a middle person. Provinces don't generate revenue. They are just consumers. So to the extent that services will move and resources will move directly from national to local government, it will make a lot of difference. But also some of the human resource capacity that resides in provinces now will be deployed to local government. Reality in our country is that problems of service delivery, problems of shortages of skills, problems of just poor planning reside at local government. So it would change it completely.
But I mean, when you go on the campaign trail, you obviously, I mean, the abolishing provinces can be your starting point. So when you go on the campaign trail, trying to convince people to vote for your party, what are the things that you say?
We're talking about empowering citizens. By the way, the slogan for our campaign is "Take Back Your Power." We are seeing that the voters said sort of outsource their power. We're talking about a direct system of electing a president. We are saying the president of the country and during local government, the mayors must be elected directly by the citizens rather than through the list system. We want a president that is accountable directly to the people rather than a political party. We are calling for a hybrid, and I think that's where we are unique again, a hybrid system of government. We want to mix a constituency base with proportional representation. Again, it's not very new. It will be new at national level in that at local government, you have your PR, but the voter all knows who the ward councillor is. So the voter will be knowing the PR members of parliament, but the voter will also be knowing so and so is the MP for my constituency.
But so far, voters have not been as responsive as Azapo would have wanted them to. Why do you think that is so? I mean, with all your struggle credentials, I mean, Azapo is just failing to attract people. Voters have, in fact, not been kind to you at all.
Well, the first question that we need to answer is whether voters are really looking at the manifestos, or they are just voting based on some other considerations. We think that is changing now. But I think the other thing that affected us was the 1994 decision. Azapo has always been ahead, unfortunately, of the voters. And the reasons that we provided for not taking part in the 1994 elections are coming to pass. Whether you want to talk about the issues of land and all those things, those were the main things that we complained about. People are beginning to say Azapo was right. We were ahead of the people again when it came to the issue of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Remember, we even went to the High Court to try and stop it. We lost. But now people are beginning to sit back and say, oh, Azapo was right. So if anything, I think we have not been able to carry people along, even where we are correct. And most of the time, we have been correct. And we are beginning to change that now.
Do you put the blame on the people not understanding your message or punishing you for not participating in 1994? Or do you put the blame on yourselves for not having organized yourselves such that, you know, people are, one, alive to your message, but two, think that you are indeed the sort of party that they are looking for that will carry them beyond the point we are in right now?
Firstly, when it comes to 1994, we don't think it's a question of punishing Azapo. But I think it's a reality that 1994 was the first democratic election. And for many people, it was the first time. And some were not even sure that they would be alive if they were to wait for the next one. So what happened is people who would have voted for Azapo in 1994 went and voted for other parties. So it was not easy for them to abandon the parties that they'd taken. We don't really think that it's punishment as such.
And you don't think you made a boo-boo either?
Well, it was a correct decision. Was it strategic at the time? With the benefit of hindsight, we might say no. if we knew what we know now, we might have handled things slightly differently. But we are still convinced, when it comes to facts, we were correct. We were correct.
Now, when you look at people like Julius Malema being able to pull the sort of crowds that they are pulling at the moment, being new kids on the block, do you feel envious?
Well, it's a yes and a no. But by the way, Azapo, we took a conscious decision, and I think we communicated that. We deliberately are not doing rallies, because rallies are expensive to start with. I mean, to carry the kind of crowd that you would need to fill a stadium, you would need about 300 buses. You don't know how much that costs. People spend about 2 million.
But the reality, though, Mr. Tugogo, is that parties, excuse me, that are able to pull the sort of numbers that fill up stadiums are the parties that tend to perform well in elections. In other words, if you can't pull the numbers to your rallies or to your pre-election gatherings, it often goes without saying that you won't get the numbers come May 7.
We are not saying we are unable. We would be unable in that we would not have the money to take the people there. But I think we are waging a different campaign, and I can assure you it is bearing fruits. We are going directly to the people to talk to them. The kind of support, it's overwhelming. Almost where we go, people are embracing us. And in fact, in some of the communities who are unable to, cope with the demand that is there. We were in the Northwest. By the way, I'm going there tomorrow in the Luhuruts area, where you have a long queue of people who want membership forms. You have a long queue of people who want membership cards. You are there, you are printing, you run out of forms, something that we have never seen in the past. People are responding very well. And I can assure you, if you were to ask me, are you happy as the leader of the party with the kind of campaign that you have waged so far? I would say a big yes. It's a completely different one, and we think that come the time when results are announced, the country will see something different from Azapo.
Do you want to make any predictions?
Well, look, we know that it's going to be a protracted one. We know it's going to be difficult. It can be overnight. I've been requested as leader to try and increase the seat in Parliament 15-fold. We have one seat now, and we are looking at 15 as our target. Achievable, yes, we think it is achievable with the resources that we have, with the kind of support that we have seen. So that's where we are.
And to someone who says you are being incredibly naive or too fantastically unrealistic to move from one MP, which you've never been able to improve on, and to now say you'll get 15.
Somebody who's standing outside the structures of Azapo now might say that and would forgive that person for saying that. But the 15 was based on the reality that we saw, on the kind of structures that we have built. In 2009, we came up with a document called the Johannesburg Commitment that told us what needed to be done. And our structures have been doing that. We have established regional structures in areas we never existed before. We have branches in areas we never existed before. So based on what we see, yes, it is achievable.
The person who has inspired you the most?
That's a difficult one. Many people have impacted on my life. But in terms of ideologically who I am is, ironically, somebody I've never met, Steve Biko. Because at the time that Biko was an activist, I was just a young boy. I've never met Biko, but yes, inspired me a lot. There are many others that I could mention.
Your favorite local politician? South African, that is.
Msewudi Mangen.
Your favorite international political icon?
Look, I guess I would go to people like Ernesto Che Guevara, who's unfortunately not alive now.
Someone you once looked up to, but who disappointed you in the end?
If I would talk about boxing, I would talk about, and I've said this before, Floyd Mayweather Jr. A wonderful career, but he has not managed his personal life the way he should have as an icon and a model for many young people, particularly young black people.
What do you think of Julius Malema?
I wish I could say nothing, but look, I don't see any difference between Julius and President Zuma. they are the same person, except that they might have fought about how they're going to share their loot.
Mampela Rampela?
A disappointment.
Jacob Zuma?
A disaster.
Mr. Tugobo, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
May the best party win.
Thank you very much.
And that's where we end tonight's show. Join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Till then, good night.